This is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. On the Central Coast today, and we are joined by Adam Hill. He is a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County. And sir, recently you had a letter to the editor published in the local paper, the Tribune. And that letter touched many people, not just in this county, but your home state of New Jersey. And the letter is about Murph. Who's Murph?
Murph was a friend of mine that I grew up with in New Jersey, as you said, suburbs, commuter suburbs outside New York. Knew him since I was in kindergarten, and we grew up playing ball, going to school together. By the time we graduated high school, he was most likely to succeed in the school yearbook. He was most artistic, probably sweetest guy you could meet. We went to college in general areas. I went to Maryland. He was in North Carolina in Wake
so
Forest.
not far.
Yeah, we were able to stay in touch. And at some point, his sophomore year, about 19 years old, he just left school suddenly in the middle of the semester and was driving around the country calling me and other friends from payphones. And we didn't really know what was going on.
But it was clear that Murph had what we call a break.
Yeah. It wasn't clear. I don't think it was clear then.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, we knew something was going on, but it wasn't. This was like 1986. I don't think that candid discussions of mental health problems were as common. And so we knew something was going on, but we also were just kind of confused. Like we would just say, like, Murph, what are you doing?
Right around the same time, I had a cousin who I grew up with, and he was my smart cousin. He was the one I always wanted to be because he was going to be the most successful of our whole family. He got into Berkeley,
Right.
and there was no doubt he was going places. In his sophomore year, he had a break.
Yeah.
And it's now 30 years later, and he sits in an institution.
Did you know at the time that it was a breakdown of some
I
kind?
think so.
Yeah.
I think we did. His father was a doctor, not a psychiatrist, but a doctor, but it was pretty clear to us that this was a psychiatric matter.
Yeah.
And we had psychiatric issues in our family. It was still a devastating an event. And what was so sad about it was during his 30s, he had a few years of lucidity, and we thought he was going to bounce back. But in the end, he didn't.
Yeah.
And I understand Murph also had years of lucidity.
Yeah, he went through periods where it seemed, I think, that he was self-medicating through alcohol and other drugs probably, and he was able to maintain jobs for years at a time, though he never could quite get ahead, and he seemed to always have some problem that we would discover later, gambling, debts. He just a series of self-destructive behaviors that had to be related to his untreated illness.
And I understand the reason you wrote this letter to remember Murph is because it's hard to deny that not just in this county, but throughout the state and the nation, there is a misunderstanding about mental illness. There is, one could argue, a lack of commitment to funding to quash mental illness. What can you tell us about mental health services here?
Yeah, so it's still, I think as you say, I mean, there's still a lack, even though there have been laws passed, there's a lack of parity. And physical illnesses get treated much differently than mental illnesses. And not just by people in terms of how they talk about them, which we know is a problem, but also by the system itself.
It's tricky, Adam, because with physical illness, you can look under a slide and see cancer. In our lifetimes, we can't see schizophrenia. We may be able to when we're gone, but you can't look under a slide and see it. And I think that has caused a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's harder, obviously, to establish, though I do think people in the mental health profession are pretty good at being able to say why something has happened and what it's related to and what we might do to treat it. And it's still difficult. There's still stigma. There's still shame attached to it. It's not as easy to talk about mental illness as physical illness. I mean, people will talk about their experience with cancer and surviving cancer all the time. But you don't hear them talk about their struggles with mental illness as openly and as commonly.
My question is, do you feel as if Murph, if he had had a break today, would be better off and when his break occurred in the 80s?
That's a good question. It's one I think about all the time, and I mention that. I think so, just because the people closest to him would have been more readily. I know that these kinds of breakdowns do happen, as with your cousin, to young men of college age.
Right.
That's a very common period for a variety of reasons, but we know that now.
Right.
And I've met a lot of other families who have come to talk to me about our need in our community for greater services, and those experiences are very relatable.
What's also remarkable about this tragedy of mental illness is we're in an era of gun violence.
Right.
And there's a lot of discussion that the cause of much of the gun violence is as a result of mental illness. Democrats and Republicans agree on this.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the tragedy of gun violence can help to provide more services, or has it helped to provide more services for the treatment of mental illness?
Yeah, well, that's excellent that you brought that up, because that's something that we are doing in our county right now, something called Laura's Law, which you may know about.
Yes.
So it's been passed in, I think, about 6 or 7 of the 58 counties so far.
And as I understand Laura's Law, it allows a family member to seek court intervention if someone is either a risk to themselves or others.
Exactly. It's a program that you have to adopt and develop by the legislative guidelines, and it is based on a gal, Laura, who sadly was a victim to violence from a mentally ill
in Nevada
patient.
County, I remember that.
Yep.
This may seem slightly off topic, but I want to get a sense from you about the kind of the tone of our country. Hillary Clinton, who's a presidential candidate, recently talked about how this may not be what a presidential candidate should say, but we need more love and kindness in our country.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump has been criticized for making light of those with, I think it was a physical disability or a mental disability. So are there actions elevating the question of mental illness, disability, whatever it may be, in your mind?
Well, I hope so, in a positive way, in the sense that I quote in the viewpoint that I wrote about Murph, something that John F. Kennedy said while he's president. He gave a landmark speech on mental illness, and he had a daughter he had a sister who suffered severe mental disability and had been
lobotomized.
Lobotomized,
because we know.
Yeah.
I mean, even this is before Murph and before my cousin. I mean, they didn't know what to do.
Right, and so at this point in 1960 or so, 61, JFK is talking about how the community itself needs to be committed to understanding and caring for people, and it's taken us a long time to get there, because I still think it's not just difficult for people to talk about, I think it's still stigmatized and ridiculed. If somebody ran for president, and we saw that in the 70s, Eagleton, who it turned out he had mental health problems, he had been hospitalized, he hadn't been treated, and that ruled him out as somebody, which is really, when you think about it now, seems grossly unfair. But I also understand the concerns that people might have about somebody who's going to be the key decision maker about a nuclear arsenal and war. But nonetheless, I think our understanding of mental illness is still so imperfect that people just are afraid. And therefore, you're not going to see. You see now one of the Kennedy family, which is Patrick Kennedy, being an advocate for addiction and for mental illness.
But it's interesting. Somehow I feel as if addiction we can forgive. The amorphous mental illness we have difficulty grasping. But yet, the tragedy of it all is that we now know there are medications that can really turn people's lives around.
Oh yeah, medications, treatments.
Right. Sure. And do you know if Murph is able to access those medications?
I don't. We lost contact about a decade ago, and people don't know where he is. He had been kind of falling out of life continuously until everybody lost contact with him. I think his family did what they could. I know he'd been in rehab, and I think what happened was they were treating symptoms.
I send my best to Murph, to my cousin, to you, Adam Hill, a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter Local Edition.